Yo, welcome to Six Layers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Six Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? We have one of the legendary Death of Superman and Reign of Superman creators with us today. Let them know who we got.
Joining us today, we have one of the legends in Superman lore, Jon Bogdanove. But before we chat with Jon, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest is the co-creator of Steel and part of the legendary Death of Superman crossover. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you Jon Bogdanove. What's up, Jon? How you doing?
I'm doing real well. How are you guys?
I'm doing fantastic. I have to say, 2025 has been killer for us. We've had rock star guests left and right, and you're one of them. So thank you for joining us today. So we're going to get started. Okay, so sure. Jon, since it's your first time joining us, we like to get our guests comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comics?
Oh, okay. Well, we have to go way back. The year was 1985. Judy and I were living on her boat in New York City. So we lived on the 79th Street boat basin on the west side of New York, which in those days was really, it was Spider-Man country. You know, the buildings all had water towers on them, and it was, living in New York felt like living in a Marvel comic. And I had been a student at School of Visual Arts for 2 years, but I'd run out of money, and I was making a marginal living as an itinerant caricature artist at weddings and trade shows and bar mitzvahs and stuff. And Judy was a school teacher. So if you can believe it, there was a time in New York City when a poor artist and an elementary school teacher could actually live in Manhattan. Judy's pregnant with Kal-El, and I need to kick it up a notch. So, but in those days, you know, you couldn't just. Now everybody knows how to do comic books. You just Google it. In those days, I really didn't know. I always wanted to draw comic books, at least, you know, around 7 or 8 when I finally realized that nothing, no amount of wishful thinking was going to make it hurt less when I jumped off the neighbor's carport with a towel around my neck. Flying was out of the question. So drawing was sort of the next best thing. I'd started to work on some samples. I had a Superman story I was working on my own, basically a realistic take. It was not long after Mount St. Helens, and so I was trying to draw a realistic take on Superman, where what would Superman do in a volcano situation like that? I mean, it's a lot more difficult than like stretching his cape over the top of a neat little cone. So I was working on that on my own, but I didn't really know how to proceed, how to get into comics. And at the time, Judy's my favorite comic because part of our courtship was reading comics. I'm married to a wonderful nerd girl who shares my obsession, and so our favorite post-coital comic book reading routine was to snuggle to reading Thor and Power Pack, which were our 2 favorites at the time. And so while I'm on the boat moaning about, well, I don't know, I just don't know how to proceed. I don't know the basics. How do you get a job drawing comic books? Judy thought, well, why don't you just call up Walter and Louise Simonson? It seems like they live in the neighborhood, you know, because the Power power parents live in the neighborhood. I bet you could just call them up. And I was like, oh, Judy, no, it doesn't work like that. You don't just call up famous people, legends in the comic book industry, and say, oh, hey, how can I get in your business? No. That's ridiculous. And while I'm objecting, she's flipping through the New York phone book. She finds their number. She dials the phone and hands it to me. And I find myself cold calling Walter Simonson.
Oh crap!
So the bearded great one picks up the phone on the other. Hello. You don't know me, but I want to draw comics. So Walter was spectacular. He spent close to an hour with me on the phone. Just a great, welcoming, helpful mentoring, and he told me what to do, which in those days was do 3 pages of Marvel continuity, 3 pages of a DC character, try to show a variety of circumstances, not just superhero fighting, but civilian stuff and vehicles and buildings and things like that, as well as superhero stuff, and make 2 sets of full-size Xeroxes of both sets. So you have your DC and Marvel pages in one envelope and your DC and Marvel pages in another envelope. And you make an appointment with one of the editors, because in those days, it was part of every editor's job to look for new talent and break hearts. So very often Wednesday afternoon or something like that, they'd set aside a couple hours to see young artists and to critique a portfolio, and sometimes, occasionally, rarely, actually hire one. So Walter said, call up, make an appointment with some editors that you think you have a shot with, whose books you think you'd be good at, and go in and present them your Xeroxes, and make sure not to bring originals, because they're going to want to keep them. And that was essentially it. And of course, he talked at length about visual storytelling theory, all of which literally every word was gold. So I was already, Walter was already a hero of mine, but I got off the phone and Walter was really a hero of mine. So I did exactly what he said. I made up 2 sets of samples. I took 3 good representative pages from my Superman story, and I drew up 3 pages of Conan, because I thought Conan would be a really fun thing to draw at Marvel. And I made a couple of appointments, and my first appointment was with the fellow at DC, who's no longer there now, but he was teaching at SVA, so we had a connection there. He had been drawing caricatures for some kind of fundraising thing for the school, and I had given him a break so he could go eat and use the bathroom, and I took his place drawing caricatures for him for a while. So he gave me his card and said, "Come see me anytime." So I made an appointment with him, and I made an appointment an hour or 2 later for about 2 hours later with Larry Hama at Marvel, because Larry edited Conan the Barbarian in those days. And I went to DC, and I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but I spent 2 hours in the waiting room chatting with the receptionist, until eventually an assistant came out and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Blank, can't see you today." So I left him my portfolio and asked the assistant to give him the envelope, and I ran across town to Marvel. I'm wearing my dress for the job you want clothes, so I've got a blue suit and a red tie, and I'm sitting next to that fiberglass statue of Clark in the in the waiting room. So I took off at a run across town, and really just flew through the streets like sort of like a nerdy action movie, trying not to bump into people, jumping over hobos and things like that. I got down to Marvel, and I burst off the elevator, and the receptionist was absolutely lovely, and she notified Larry Hama, and Larry himself came out and got me, and we walked through the bullpen, and it was still the Marvel age of comics. It was the last few years of the Marvel age of comics, as it turned out, but at the time, it was classic. Jack Abel was holding court in the bullpen itself, cracking jokes, as people like Al Milgrom and Mary Severin were doing last minute corrections and things like that, and the offices of the editors were all arranged in a horseshoe around the bullpen itself, and all their doors were open, and it just seemed like a big sort of happy clubhouse at the time. It seemed almost unprofessional, but in a positive way. If you look at pictures of those days, you can sort of see it was like it's a little bit like did you see the movie Saturday Night, about the first night of Saturday Night Live? It's a great movie. It captures the flavor of the era extremely well. And it'll give you an idea of the vibe at Marvel Comics in those days. It was a happening, groovy place. It was everything my little nerd heart could have hoped for. Really. It's like, oh, the Marvel Comics bullpen. And it was exactly right. And it was a sort of a noisy place. It was a lot of laughter going on, a lot of fun, a lot of running around, incredible artwork everywhere, because everything was on the boards. There was no digital artwork in those days. And Larry took me around the bullpen to his office in the back there, and he sat down and very Perry Whiteley looked through my pages, and he said, after a pause, he said, "Well, kid," called me kid. He said, "I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is we won't be firing John Buscema for you." Because I brought Conan samples. But then he said, "But you're not leaving here without a job." So he grabbed me by the ear, and he dragged me down the hall to Carl Potts's office, where Carl was talking with this sort of angelic, beautiful blonde lady about who to get to replace June Brigman on Power Pack. And I realized from the context of what they were talking about that this was the legendary Louise Simonson, which was an odd kind of coincidence, since it was Walter that got me started. So I'm standing there politely listening. First of all, Larry drags me in. He says, "Here, Carl, give this guy work. Oh, and kid, next time you come in, don't dress like a company president." Because, in those days, everyone was wearing, like, I don't know, picture t-shirts and bell bottoms. I don't know if it was bell bottoms yet. Yeah, it was 1985. But anyway, it was that vibe. So I'm standing there, politely listening to their conversation, and meanwhile, while they're talking, Carl is sort of absent-mindedly thumbing through my pages, and Louise is complaining, about who to get to draw Power Pack because, in her opinion, at the time, June Brigman was the only artist in comics who could draw kids. Everybody else drew kids like muscular dwarves. And then the miracle happened. A year before, Judy and I had been sort of vagabonding around the country in a hippie van because she'd had a sabbatical from work. And that's actually when we discovered Power Pack. And during our camping around the country, we had stopped at a beach in Maine, Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and I had drawn some sketches of these kids who were playing on the beach, building sandcastles and stuff. And from those sketches, I had made a drawing, and I'd sold the drawing at a gallery, and it was one of my first sales of artwork. But somehow, a year later, one of the sketches of those kids on the beach had found its way into my Marvel portfolio. Not the package I sent to DC, just the Marvel portfolio. To this day, I don't know how I even still had the sketches because they, pretty much everything from that trip had disappeared by that point. But this sketch floated down out from between the pages that Carl was looking at and settled down on his desk. And Louise said, "Look, Carl, he can draw kids." That was pretty much it for me. Carl hired me that day. He started me out with an issue of Alpha Flight 32, but signed me up to take over Power Pack when June left, which is she still had 2-3 months to go.
That's a great segue because we have a Power Pack question. You worked on Power Pack, you worked on Alpha Flight, Fantastic Four versus the X-Men, and then you moved to DC, obviously after that. Was there, and you mentioned that you were kind of at the tail end of the Marvel era, like the classic Marvel era of comics, right?
Yes.
Was there a difference once you moved to DC? Was there a difference in the way production was, especially with the scripts?
Well, actually, not so much with the scripts. I know what you're talking about. I was very fortunate when I moved to DC because I'd already sort of befriended Mike Carlin when we were working on Fantastic Four versus the X-Men. He left in the middle of that project or toward the end of that project. I can't remember which, but he moved to DC to edit John Byrne on the Superman relaunch, on the Superman reboot, Man of Steel. And so Mike was editing 3 Superman books and coordinating the storylines in all of them. And what Mike was really doing for DC, which turned out to be more successful than DC could ever have imagined, was he was trying to give DC its own Marvel age. So he brought the Marvel method to DC, and that's how the Superman books were working. But it was working on a scale that it never did at Marvel. At Marvel, you'd have one writer and one artist and an editor team up to figure out the stories, and it was basically simple. What are we going to do this month, guys? Or even just the writer and the artist. At DC, Mike was trying to coordinate 3 different teams to do the same thing. So it was a very ambitious thing that Mike was trying to do. I guess it wasn't ambitious enough, because he thought he'd add a fourth book to his load to coordinate. So almost from the moment he moved to DC, he'd call me up on a regular basis to invite me to come over to draw Superman. Our son Kal-El, as a baby, was a very charming and articulate kid early on.
Cool ass name, by the way. I gotta just say, you got a son, the actual baby son, grown ass man named Kal-El right now.
Actually, baby, yes, and right now he's directing performance capture on Marvel Comics game. So I probably can't say which one, but he's a director right here in Hollywood, and he's doing some action-packed performance capture work for Marvel, ironically enough, and he's done a lot of DC as well.
Shout out to Kal-El.
Shout out to Kal-El, yeah. But anyway, almost from the start, Mike had been courting me to come over and do Superman. He knew I loved Superman. He knew that Superman was my totem, my surrogate father, my my spirit animal, and that I had I had come to comics wanting to draw Superman, and he thought I'd be perfect for it. So he was courting me on a fairly regular basis, and I was actually a little chicken shit at the time, because I didn't want to move to Superman until I was really at the peak of my power, and I still felt, even though I'd been at Marvel for 6 or 7 years at that point, I still felt I'm just learning, man. I'm just at the start. I should be at the peak of my powers when I go to Superman. But Kal-El, who was 7, and I was drawing X Factor at the time, and I got to draw some pretty good things at Marvel. I drew the first confrontation of Wolverine and Sabretooth, and I got to draw a somewhat censored sex scene between Jean, one of the first romantic scenes between Jean and Wolverine, and I didn't want to just bail on Wheezy, who was writing X Factor at the time for me. So I kept coming up with these excuses. So Kal-El, who was 7 at the time, started to receive boxes of DC swag from Mike Carlin. So Kal-El would get a box of cool DC swag, and he'd sort of sidled into the studio, and he's about 7 at the time, and he puts his arm on my shoulder and he says, "Well, Dad, I think that you should go to work for Mike Carlin at DC Comics."
I knew where that was going, man.
That was very. Kal-El's a very, very effective persuader. And then Mike said, "Look, if you come over to DC now, we'll give you your own Superman book with issue number 1. I'll invite Wheezy to come write it, since Marvel is sort of in a self-destructive phase at the moment. I will, we'll get Wheezy to write it. Will you come and draw it if I do that?" And I said, "Well, heck yes, I'll do whatever, I would work for Louise Simonson as a writer anytime. And to work with Wheezy on Superman is essentially a bucket list dream come true. So that's how Superman the Man of Steel got started.
And you talked about Wheezy. That was our next question. Can you elaborate a little bit more about your collaborative relationship with her and her importance in the comic book industry, according to you?
Well, Wheezy's importance in the comic book industry cannot be overstated. God, I got a lot of stories about her. I actually met Wheezy without realizing it many years before, in 1975, when she was the editor-in-chief over at Warren Publications. The comics, even today, comics are still a male-dominated. It's a sausage fest in comics. It really is. And most of the guys in comics traditionally look like me. They're sort of, overweight, middle-aged guys with beards. White guys usually, unfortunately. And so Wheezy, in a lot of ways, was a pioneer. Not just because, and she's really, people approach Wheezy about being on panels about women in comics, and she always turns it down because I'm not sure why one, she's very humble. She gets uncomfortable when people talk about her being a legend and a pioneer, but the fact of the matter is she is a pioneer and a legend. I met her when I went to Warren. I was like 17 or something like this, and 1975, and I'd been to a convention in New York City. I'd taken the bus up from Virginia, and after the convention, a guy I'd met at the convention, and I thought we'll stay an extra day. We'll go around, we'll show our portfolios around. And we had gone to Warren Publications and been very warmly received by the art director there. And I had physically handled, elaborate black and white artwork by Bernie Wrightson and Gene Colan and Steve Ditko. I mean, just original masterpieces. Reed Crandall with wash and everything else like that. Just the most beautiful pages you can imagine. And I learned a lot that day. And then in the midst of that, Jim Warren came in off of his yacht or whatever, and he was dressed like a 70s dude he had like a lime green leisure suit open to here with gold chain, and he was like, and he pretty much kicks down the door and starts yelling at people and berating people, and he started dressing down his art director in front of us. What are these kids doing here? Blah, 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 blah. This is a workplace. What are you showing them stuff? They're not supposed to see this stuff till it comes out. Blah, 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 blah. A lot of. I was stunned at the time because up until that point, I thought, man, the comics community, comics industry is a wonderful place to be. But this guy was so dehumanizing to his employee that I found it really disheartening. And I was a big kid, and I had to restrain myself from flattening Jim Warren just because he was so incredibly rude. And I said, well, no, I don't want to end up in jail, and I might want to work for this asshole someday. But anyway, me and this other guy got on the elevator to leave feeling really kind of crestfallen and down in the dumps, really down in the dumps. And onto the elevator with us stepped this blonde angel. And Wheezy was this cute hippie chick. I mean, she really was adorable. And she radiated sunshine wherever she went. And she asked us what was the matter, and we told her what had happened. And she sort of waved her hand dismissively and said, "Oh, that's just Jim." And for some reason, that phrase, "Oh, that's just Jim," just cleared away the clouds and the cobwebs, and we felt fully restored, and we, bounced off that elevator with our tails wagging, ready to take on the world. And that's sort of Wheezy's superpower. As an editor of the X books, she presided over the most legendary period. All the material that has been in the movies, adapted to the movies, was stuff that either Wheezy wrote or Wheezy edited. So in terms of contributing to the zeitgeist of the Marvel universe, um, Wheezy is as important as Chris Claremont, I think, to that era. But it was said of her at the time that no matter how contentious a situation was, no matter how angry someone was when they walked into Wheezy's office, they would always leave with their tails wagging. And that's really true. Wheezy is this southern steel magnolia who is brilliant, but also has a knack for making people feel good. Really,
that's a great, man. I love how you said that she's up there with Chris Claremont, man. So you're giving her flowers. That's what we wanted. Now, you've mentioned a lot about Mike Carlin, and we didn't know that you had the history that you have with Mike Carlin and how all these relationships kind of evolved over time. They kind of bled into Superman. And so I want to talk about the legendary conference that was held by Mike Carlin to get the Death of Superman stuff started. Can you tell us what everybody's assignment was and whatever you remember from those days?
Well, sure. I mean, this is a memory of a memory of a memory, because this is a story I've told often, as you can imagine. And it probably, I know you've had Dan on here, so it probably syncs up pretty well with him. Be interesting to see where we differ. I think it was maybe my second Super Summit. I was still sort of the new kid on the block. Second or third Super Summit, one or the other. Anyway, the Super Summit were these wonderful, great Marvel bullpen-like get-togethers where, 4 teams, 12 creative people, 4 writers, 4 pencilers, 4 inkers, even the colorist would all get together in New York or somewhere. DC would put us up, fly us in from wherever we lived, and lock us in a room for 5 days while we figured out the next year's worth of continuity on Superman. And all the stories had to be coordinated with each other, and sometimes we'd fight because he so and so always gets the climactic action stuff at the end of the story. I want climactic action stuff or whatever. a lot of silly stuff. Anyway, but mostly everyone got along pretty well. Everybody there cared an enormous amount about Superman. We were all obsessive Superman fans, and this is a period in comics history where Superman had been sort of at a low ebb. It was all about the Punisher and Wolverine and Spawn and the Image comics and the dark age of comics, they refer to it now. Everything had to be grim and gritty and Batman-y and stuff like that. And so Superman was thought of as sort of old-fashioned, and his sales were down around like 7,000 per month or something. Pretty small, barely enough to sustain what it cost to produce him. Mike started to turn that around the minute he took over. Well, John Byrne had a lot to do with that too, but they'd started to turn it around. And everybody in that room cared deeply about it. A lot of us had grown up watching George Reeves on television. We'd all seen the Chris Reeve movies, and we all felt very strongly about the character. So sometimes that would lead to conflicts because everybody had strong ideas. But it worked remarkably well with Mike at the helm. I don't know many editors who could have coordinated that. I mean, every editor at Marvel worked the Marvel method, but no one had ever done it with 4 teams simultaneously. Even on the X books, when Louise was editing the X books, she was still working with individual teams. So it was an enormous feat of keeping everybody happy, keeping everybody working together. I mean, we were lucky because we all really respected each other. I mean, I was in awe of Jerry Ordway. I was in awe of Jackson Geiss, the late Jackson Geiss.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Rest in peace, brother. Roger Stern was, like Wheezy, he was one of the great Marvel guys, had also been an editor, and was a master of continuity. Roger was great because he would, whenever we got off track or made a mistake or forgot to include something in the pages or whatever, anytime we goofed on continuity, he would find a way to fix it when it came around to him. He'd find a way to get us back on track. He was actually really a genius with that stuff. And we tried not to make mistakes, but you have this plan, this chart at the end of the Superman summit, and then you get into the grind month after month after month after month. It's easy to forget a detail. Roger never forgot a detail, and he always found a way. Roger was winning a no prize pretty much every month. It was a master that way. Anyway, the classic story goes like this. We had been locked in a windowless conference room in Rockefeller Plaza with an outgassing carpet around a conference table for 5 days, during which time we had planned a year's continuity leading up to the marriage of Clark and Lois. Because the year before, Clark had revealed his secret identity to Lois, and we had been dealing with the courtship ever since, and we were leading up to the wedding in a way that was I thought very natural and charming. But toward the end of the 5 days, Jeanette Kahn, who to this day is like one of the best from a corporate standpoint, she's really more than you would expect from a corporate person. But she came in with the news that a new television show called Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman had been greenlit in Hollywood by a friend of hers. She and Mike huddled for a while, and they came back with this idea: wouldn't it be cool if we could postpone the wedding of Lois and Clark to coordinate with the television show? It would be the first such cross integration, media integration of a superhero property ever, where the movies and the TVs would coordinate. And it was a really good idea, but it meant we had to scrap 5 days work and a whole year's worth of continuity. So back into the windowless room we all went, and as always happened, there was a running gag that whenever we got stuck on what to do next, got stuck in the plotting of a story, Jerry Ordway, sitting in the back with his feet up on the desk, would say, and then we kill him. Or, and then Superman dies. And it was such a clam that, we'd chuckle perfunctorily and roll our eyes. But this time we'd had this discussion about what was going on in the rest of the industry. And why didn't fandom recognize the amazing work that was being done on Superman? You know, why hadn't, I mean, the sales had picked up, obviously, but they I mean, there was nothing compared to what Wolverine was doing, nothing compared with what Batman was doing. Why not? We're doing some of the best comic books that have ever been done with this character. And Mike is trying to get the conversation to back on, guys, if we're not doing the wedding, what are we doing? What are we doing? And you know, Ordway said, the Ordster said, let's kill him. And we all groaned. And then Wheezy, who as editor of the X books had presided over the death of many characters, poor dead Doug, and she killed Colossus for a while. And anyway, she piped up and she said, you know what you get from killing a character, don't you? And it took people a minute to recognize that she was about to drop some gold. You know what you get from killing a character is you get to tell the story of what that character meant through the eyes and reactions of his friends, family, the people who loved him, the people who hated him, the general public. You sort of get to tell It's a Wonderful Life type story to show how important that character was. And that galvanized us all immediately, because what we wanted more than anything was to show the world and to show comics fandom how important this character was. So within minutes, we had written Funeral for a Friend. And that really came first. The reaction part came first. And it poured out of all of us. We all had great bits, you know, that literally brought tears to our eyes where we were talking about it. And before you know it, we had the whole Funeral for a Friend story, and then it was time to figure out, well, how does Superman actually die? And we were all convinced we didn't want Luthor to have the satisfaction. And we knew that Superman had to die defending his city. So we thought, well, it should be a big fight where Superman is defending the Earth. And it should be a new character. And Dan, one of Dan's consistent things, we all tried to do this, but Dan was really strong on it, was to give Superman more opponents he could punch. You know, Superman had his share of business suit villains and lame characters like, you know, the Toy Man or whatever. But you know, besides Mongol and Darkseid, he didn't really have anybody in his weight class that he could you know, go ham on. So so Dan had brought in a sketch of a big Hulk-like character with bony protrusions, and he brought it in. It was going to be the monster of the month in one of his books, but he said, you know, how about my character here? And on the chart, Mike had written the story leading up to the death of Superman, and then Doomsday for Superman, and then the Funeral for a Friend stuff. And so Doomsday became the name of whatever the monster was going to be. And Mike, to be fair to everybody, said, well, you know, we have this drawing from Dan, but why don't you all take a few minutes now and come up with some character designs, and we'll vote, and whatever the best one is, we'll take it. And we all did, and we didn't have a lot of time to think about it, but everybody came up with something, and unanimously, really by consensus, we all thought Dan's was the best. Dan's was the most thought out. He had come in with it to begin with. He definitely looked like a character that could go toe-to-toe with Superman. We did not, unfortunately, think about what a pain in the ass those damn bony protrusions were going to be. but it was the best character. and then Brett Breeding had the very clever idea that the fight should spread over all 4 books, and as the books got closer and closer to the death, the number of panels per page should be reduced. So you start out with a 4 panel pages, and then the next issue would be 3 panel pages, and the next issue would be 2 panel pages, and then the final issue, the issue that Brett would actually be inking, would only have 1 panel per page. And it would be very dramatic. And the genius behind that idea was, when you read it all together, like if you have the phone book there, the omnibus, every panel in a comic book is a click. It's a moment of time, and the fewer the panels you have, the faster the time is going. So it really makes the action speed up and the urgency of the story increase as you go. So, the fight basically took no time to plot after that. After that revelation, so the plot didn't take very long. The major part of the work was in the funeral for a friend, but we got both arcs written basically in an afternoon.
John, throughout this era, throughout the Death of Superman era, throughout the Funeral for a Friend era, throughout the Reign of Superman era, did you have a favorite moment throughout that time?
I had many favorite moments. Working on Superman, particularly in those days, was a really rare gig, where every day when you go to work is a joy, and this is in spite of the fact that I was working 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost 8 years that I was on those books. So it was physically a rough job. But in terms of joy, the joy was continuous. Mike had this way. He would as soon as you sent in pages, he'd make Xeroxes of the week's pages and send them out to everybody. So every week we all got a package of Xeroxes where we could see what the other guys were doing, and we'd go, "Holy crap! Look what Jackson has done. How am I going to top this?" Or, "Holy crap! Look what Ordway has done. How am I going to top that?" And so it would really keep us goosed up. Look at this charming sequence Grummett just drew. God damn it! I gotta up my game on charm. That kind of stuff. And Dan too. So it's hard to pick out. Certainly, I can't pick out just one. But there are many. I really love the Mixius Pidlick stories, mostly because Wheezy gave me a lot of latitude to make, what basically were 22-page fart jokes. So she gave me a lot of latitude on that, and I really appreciated that. Wheezy taught me pretty much everything I know about writing. I also really like the World War II Superman in the Holocaust story that we did close to the end, and I really think I loved creating Steel. I liked the way that Steel happened. We were meeting. Where did we meet for the Reign of Superman Super Summit? It wasn't at DC. But anyway, Mike had the idea that we should all, during the time that Superman was dead, that we should all sort of break up and do our own thing for a couple of months. And he wanted us to, and he had this notion about doing substitute Superman, because in the Silver Age, when he was a kid, there was this thing called the substitute Superman for a while, which was a bunch of other guys basically in Superman's clothes. But it would give us each a chance to come up with a thing of our own. And Dan had suggested, because Dan was masterminding a character that he would turn into a villain, the cyborg. Because again, Dan is looking for good villains that Superman can punch. So Dan suggested that Weezy and I should do an everyday schlub who wants to be Superman. And I think he was thinking we could play it for humor, which would have been good. But what the hook that found me was the idea of a normal man trying to fill in for Superman, a normal man trying to do what only a Superman can do. At the time, I knew that DC didn't really have their own Iron Man. They did have a billionaire oligarch superhero in Bruce Wayne, and I'm not sure who's richer, Tony Stark or Bruce Wayne, but I like the idea of a sort of a do-it-yourself Iron Man, a DIY guy who builds his armor in the basement, and goes out to try and do Superman's job without Superman's powers. And I thought, well, and DC needs a good armored superhero, I didn't immediately think, and DC needs more diversity. What I thought was, I'd always loved the story of John Henry, the Steel Driving Man. As a kid, it hit me really hard. It's the sacrifice is very much like the death of Superman, the sacrifice that John Henry makes in the legend. And just that image of the great big tall black guy with the hammer, that looked like comic book stuff in my imagination. So I was talking to Weezy about the idea of a character based on John Henry, the Steel Driving Man, because there was that connection, steel, Man of Steel, blah blah blah. And Weezy said, it's not just a story. There was a real person. John Henry really existed. So that locked it in for us. We decided to build a character based on this genuine historical character of American history. Neil Adams, God bless him, Neil Adams had drawn some great looking black characters. Jon Stewart,
right? Yep.
Right, Jon Stewart, and the old black guy that comes and gives Hal Gordon shit, it's so 70s. I see where you've helped the blue people. I see where you've helped the purple people. I see what have you done for the black people, Mr. Green Lantern? Great, on the nose storytelling there. But that face is so good, and he'd done such a good job with Muhammad Ali, and he'd done such a good job with Martin Luther King, and that reading that stuff as a kid made me want to draw black people. I was when I was in middle school in Richmond, Virginia. It was like the first year of busing down there, and so I got bused to this middle school on the black side of town called Chandler High. Represent Chandler, and it was an uncomfortable situation in the early 70s. I think most of the kids who went to that school felt invaded by the white kids from the other side of town being bussed in. The white kids felt, I think, I don't know. I'm lucky because we had moved from Indiana. I was so unwoke and clueless about stuff. So I didn't understand. I didn't understand the South. I didn't understand racism. I didn't understand. I was completely unprepared. So I was uncomfortable with the, I didn't feel like sitting with the white kids at the white kids table in the lunchroom. I wasn't really welcome I hadn't made any friends among the black kids yet. So I would take my drawing notebook and I'd go out to the playground at lunch instead, and I'd sit on the bleachers and I'd draw, and a bunch of the upperclassmen would be playing basketball, and there was this group of girls who were giving them shit all the time in a sort of flirtatious way, and I'd draw these kids, and I just felt like Neil Adams. I was looking to draw a black character whenever I could. So designed John Henry, and I had to draw the face mask in a way that actually just showed his whole face. So it was this liquid metal affair that showed all the contours of his face. Because I still think he's one of the best looking characters out there. Wow, that's too much. That's TMI about the creation of John Henry. But I'd have to say, the creation of John Henry was probably the best moment.
I love it, man. And continue on with the wake of Superman. On the wake of Superman's death, let's talk about the public response. We heard that members of the Superman team, some certain members of the Superman team, received death threats.
Yeah, that's true. That's part of the legend. I think Mike got the most death threats. DC, people would send death threats to DC, and they'd turn them over to Mike. In my little town in Maine, I was known as that Superman guy. Oh, you're that Superman guy. And the tone of that, oh, you're that Superman guy, really changed for a while. I could see myself, ending up as lobster bait. But I think it was Mike took most of the heat. It's an interesting thing about Superman. People weren't reading Superman. People weren't paying attention to Superman. But literally everybody in the world knew who Superman was. And there is to this day sort of a populist notion of Superman. And they may not want to read him. They may not think he's cool, but they want to think that he's there. They want to think that Superman is there. And he's so tied in with truth, justice, and the American way. And by American way, I mean the ideal of what America wants to be, should be, hopes to be. He sort of embodies our greatest aspirations as a culture. And if Superman could die, what does that say about America?
Right.
So people were upset, and Mike blows it off. He says, "Oh, it's just a slow news week, week for news cycle." But it wasn't just one news cycle; it was weeks of news cycles, and it kept going on for months for us. DC actually stopped publishing Superman for 2 months. People thought for a while that it was really gone. And then when it started to resume publication, Superman wasn't in those books. So it seemed for a while to people that DC, the Warner Brothers, whatever, the corporation, was moving away from their old legacy characters and replacing them with these other characters, characters. And I think that that upset a lot of people. And because it's America, some of those people maybe took it a little bit too far and too seriously. But it was a historic moment in the way that, the 1938 Orson Welles broadcast of War of the Worlds became historic because people went out and started shooting at water towers because they thought they were Martian tripods. This was a similar kind of moment. Comics were not at that time. Comics were not event-driven comics. They were not gimmick comics. There weren't so much in the way of gimmick covers or whatever. We actually, unfortunately, we started all that. We were the first you know, I mean, there had been Secret Wars, which was sort of an event. There had been Crisis on Infinite Earths, was sort of an event, but nothing that changed sales as much as us. Superman went from selling, 7,000 copies a month when Mike Carlin took over the book, to selling millions of copies per month, more than he had since World War II. So, and I think we still have the sales record for comics post World War II. So it was a cultural thing. It was an event, and fortunately, no one followed through on their death threats. But people were upset, and it was a moment in history.
Okay, so last couple of questions here, John. You worked a lot with Dennis Janke during the Superman era. Can you tell us what that collaborative process was like? And can you tell us a little bit about the importance of inkers in the comic industry?
Yes. Well, this is a big subject. Dennis is a friend, and I like him, but we were never well matched as a team. Dennis busted his ass to try to adapt to my pencils, and I kept trying to adapt my pencils to his inks. And so we went through a lot of different phases on Superman. You can see in the early days, he's inking me like Ordway. So I'm trying to pencil like Ordway. And we'd talk. He actually moved up to Maine. He became my neighbor for a while. So we would collaborate like old timers, physically collaborate. And I would do stuff to try to play to his strengths, and he'd try to do stuff to play to my strengths. And we eventually got there, but it took us a while. It wasn't a natural pairing. I had been inked by Hilary Barta over at Marvel, and that was instant clicking. We instantly knew how to work together. But with Dennis, it was work. And I don't know if he was ever perfectly satisfied. I don't think I was ever perfectly satisfied. I kind of cherish that we got as far as we did. And I cherish that we actually had the opportunity to work together sweatshop style, the way, old timers did. So it was a great experience being inked by Dennis, but the results were not always satisfying. And inking is now mostly a lost art, right? Because everyone draws digitally. It's too easy for an inker, it's too easy for a penciler to just ink his own work. It's just, I've always done very detailed finished pencils because that's what I saw Jack Kirby do. Jack did pencils where everything was there, and sometimes his inker Vinnie Coletta would just erase, not draw huge chunks. So, but then he, someone like Mike Royer would nail everything. But it was all in the pencils. So that's the way I drew. Everything was in the pencils, which was painful if it didn't come through in the inks the way I'd penciled it. But that's just the way I worked. So in the digital age, it's just, actually it started before that. At one point, right after Superman, I said, rather than finish this tightly in pencil, what if I just picked up a brush? And so I did, and I realized that I really liked inking my own work. I liked the obsessive control. And I think that digital inking made it easy for a lot of people to do that. And so inking became like hand lettering. It became a lost art. So there are no more hand letterers, really, very few. John Workman maybe still does it. And just for Walter. And artwork isn't physical anymore. I don't think Marvel and DC even have an artwork returns department. They used to have somebody who, trafficked all the physical artwork that came in, and made sure that when it was done, that the original artist got it back. And like Dennis would get a third, and I would get 2/3, and Dennis would usually get the back of the book where the action was, and I'd usually get all the human interest stuff up front. But I don't think they even have an artworks return thing anymore. So it's sad in a way, because inking, even when it doesn't work as well, is always is interesting. And sometimes the sum of the parts can be greater than the whole. So I have been inked by some real greats in my time. Very early on, my second job in the business, I was inked by Al Williamson. I've been inked by Al Milgram. I've been inked by Hilary Barta. I've been inked by Dick Giordano. I've been inked by Kevin Nolan. I've been inked by Klaus Janson. I've had some world-class inkers, and with every one of those inkers, I've tried to sort of tailor my pencils to their strengths. And it's always been even when it's been very different from what I drew, it's always been interesting and usually stronger. It's just a good inker back in the day when inking was real should be an actual finisher. Now, Jack did very finished pencils because I think because Vinny would screw up his pencils, wouldn't ink what he drew as well. But I think for a lot of the time that Jack was making the Marvel Age of Comics happen, he had to draw loose, and he had to rely on Joe Sinnott or Frank Giacoia to actually be a finisher, right? To add value to the work, to add line weight, to add sometimes background details. Famously, Gil Kane had an assistant named Tony Mortallero who drew backgrounds for him, who inked backgrounds for him, and who only got credit because he'd put his name on every billboard in New York City. That's the only reason I know who Tony Mortallero even was. And I sometimes miss that. I sometimes miss the combination of a penciler and an inker. Personally, I love the control of inking my own stuff, but I do get nostalgic for, like, I was inked by John Romita Sr., twice. That it's when you get to be inked by one of your heroes, one of your legends, it's a rush. It's awesome. So I miss inking. I've had some brilliant inkers in the past, and although I will usually ink myself nowadays, I'm sorry it's gone. I'm sorry inking is gone. I know there are a lot of inkers who are out of work.
John, this has been a great interview. It's been wonderful. You've given us so many gems. We're on our very last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming appearances? Any new projects?
Oh, wow. I have a very, very thin convention schedule this year. I think the only place I'm going to be at the moment is Cincinnati in October.
Oh, so speak on Superman Day at Warner Brothers about a few weeks ago, a little bit over a month ago.
Yeah, a little over a month ago, I was at Superman Day. That was great fun. That was different from your typical Comic-Con, but it was really fun. Fun to draw some sketches for the kids. I really tried to get a lot of them done. They had us wear DC T-shirts, so I was able to change. So when I arrived there, they issued me a T-shirt. So I actually changed in the telephone booth. So that was fun. Yeah, Superman Day was great. I love being on the Warner lot. That's really a nice looking film lot. I think I like Warner Brothers.
Yes. Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining us, man. This was a fantastic interview. Just know you always have a home here on the Six Layer Station. We'd love to have you back again. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Six Layers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Jon Bogdanove. We are out. Peace.
Six Layers.